Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. Every episode, I sit down to talk risk, how to avoid it, how to manage it, and how it impacts our built world. This season, we'll be diving deep into the world of AI and talking its transformative influence on risk management. Over the next 8 episodes, I'll be interviewing a series of experts in the field who will be offering unique insights and perspectives on how AI is revolutionizing the way we approach and mitigate risk. Let's get to it. Hello, Paulina. Thank you for joining me on Brick by Brick today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this.
Yeah, let's get into a little bit about you. Why don't we let the listeners know where you are currently and how you got there?
I work as a privacy manager at Crowe. I work on our internal privacy team, which means that Crowe is my client. Most of the stuff that I do day to day is focused on AI governance currently. I also have some other responsibilities that tie into the broader privacy program. However, the focus is AI currently, like for most of the privacy
Well,
professionals.
let's consider that AI wasn't a thing 3 years ago. That's Paulina. That's probably not where you started your career. So, how did you end up in a role that's as cutting edge and as you possibly could probably get?
I think like majority of any sort of risk management professionals by accident. So I started in privacy and privacy is still my primary role because AI governance is so tied into the privacy program and information security principles and just this intersection of legal and operational governance. I kind of volunteered when we started playing with AI a bit more. And this way I became our enterprise BU AI lead, which means that I essentially coordinate for all of our enterprise business units when it comes to their AI needs.
So let's start with the business needs, not just with maybe Crow giving as many examples as you can within that space, but let's just say in general, what is the enterprise, the business units wanting to do with AI at this point in time? What things are they actually trying to accomplish? And what are some of the areas where you need to start thinking about some of those privacy concerns?
I think, first off, it's very dependent on the business unit within enterprise. So, for example, finance will have very different needs than talent solutions, let's say. The main drive that I see is to start implementing AI as early as possible. However, with ensuring that we have proper risk management principles. So I will give you a few examples what people are doing, what I see in my work, but also just talking with the privacy professionals across the board. One of the things that a lot of people are doing, they're developing their own custom GPTs that they use for their day-to-day work. So for example, if I work in a contract review and during my contract review, I reference multiple policies or I have a different set of notes that I always reference back, it's very easy to take all of this knowledge base, just put it in the GPT and craft it to help you being more efficient in your work.
Right. So these custom GPTs, that's sort of the first thing that came out was how do we build this on our knowledge base? And so those are custom GPTs you see going out. But, a lot of those GPTs, in order to really be useful, need to reach out and touch the internet in some way. And I guess that's where the privacy issues come along within the enterprise. How are you deciding on what tools to use? What sort of frameworks do you recommend for looking at this problem?
So I will say, in general, having a very strong program that governs use of your vendors. So, for example, when we review our vendors, we have previously determined our risk tolerance, which
Right.
means that, for example, when we're looking for our LLM provider, we're going to look at their security measures that they employ. We're going to look into contractual provisions. So we're going to make sure that, let's say, OpenAI is not training on our confidential information. We're going to look into into their reputation. How long have this company been operating on the market? We've got multiple level reviews that actually focus on evaluating the vendor prior to onboarding that vendor. And I think that process in itself is part of very effective AI governance.
I think you're right, but I have a question, and I don't think you probably have the answer, but it's I guess a bigger moral question, which is I understand privacy, like privacy, and understanding this with like, say, if you Salesforce was your vendor, and what you're putting into Salesforce is your deals, but really they can't do anything. That's not the product Salesforce is selling. So your data is not the product in those cases. But if you are, say, choosing an LLM, you are essentially giving it what it needs in order to be better, and that is the product it's selling. It is selling the knowledge. And so, I think, how do you stay up and current on all of these rule sets around how this data might be used when it's still very much emerging, right? We're not, all the things you kind of mentioned are in your traditional privacy programs and your traditional enterprise programs, but there's a lot of area in this that we don't know, right? I mean, has it changed since you've been doing this? Like, what's the pace of innovation here that we're seeing?
So I will say the pace of innovation is super fast. The things that we have been doing, like March of last year, are no longer considered groundbreaking. Like building your custom GPT is not something that makes people clap. Like this is
Right,
just a baseline. People just assume that you're going to be able to automate some of those manual processes in your work, right?
right.
So now we're talking about the multi-agent flows. We're talking about some more advanced technologies. I think the key to actually having a good governance program in the rapidly changing environment is to have good controls. And I like to call them 3 T's of AI governance. So it's track, tailor, and transform. So the tracking part is, as in any other part of your business, you need to understand what technologies you have in your company, right? So you have to understand how AI innovation is happening. Are you focused on the citizen development? So do you look into your specific business units or delivery units and you see what people are doing on the team level or maybe personal level? Do you focus on only seeing those AI developments coming through your official pipeline, which a lot of companies are using, ServiceNow or other providers to have a pretty good streamlined review of any sort of new technologies coming to a firm? Or what
Right.
if you just have both? You've got citizen development and you've got this official pipeline. How do you document all of those things? So this is your first step of tracking. You have to be able to say, what tools are we using? What are our usage policies? Do we understand how our people are using technology? And if we don't have a better understanding, can we nominate like AI champions in every BU
Yeah.
or delivery unit? So the tracking part is your foundation for building the program, right? So the
And that
second,
probably sits right alongside all of your other sort of things that you track within, in the bigger scheme of things, right? So that's still very common to what that policy would be. I think the hard thing there that you just mentioned, if we can just double click on it, is the champion piece, because how do you govern your champions' acumen with this really new emerging technology, right? It's not a tool. It's not a tool set that I think you would expect, your head of sales to always be on the cutting edge of and understand, right? So it is a little confusing, I think, when I'm talking out there in the field about who could those champions be, because a lot of the people who are advocating for it are advocates, but they really can't champion it because they can't stay up with the pace of innovation.
and I love that you asked this question because I think the last part that also ties into this tracking part is having a really good AI enablement team. And what it means is to have people who specifically learn and teach in very accessible way what are we trying to achieve. So for example, your risk appetite is going to be very different if you're working in finance or with a healthcare information, and your risk appetite and the level of development will be very different if you're a startup that primarily deals with information that's not even personal information. So
Right.
having a team that really ties in all of those new things, like when I talk about AI champions, I don't talk about people who go and like they have to go get their own knowledge, go upskill by themselves. They need to be supported by the enablement team that actually comes to them and says, listen, this week, here are the 10 most important things that happened in AI. And here are 5 resources that we can share with you that you can share farther down the pipeline.
That's amazing. I love the idea of you're the first person I've talked to that's talking about taking some of these more traditional approaches and team structures and then applying it to this new world. And it looks very different, but it's familiar. And it also gives me a little bit of hope about, not everyone losing their job as AI comes in and takes over, because there's still more work to be done to make sure that it's being used effectively and safely and can be tracked to this point. So I understand T. Let's go to Taylor. What's Taylor about?
Okay, so tailoring is about understanding your organization's risk appetite. So, as I previously mentioned, we can have small companies that are startups that are their goal is not to go into the financial markets or deal with the healthcare information. Their risk appetite is going to be very different from the companies that deal with regulated entities. I will say that tailored frameworks should be something that people consider at first. And what I mean by saying tailored framework is you should not go and look at NIST AI framework if you're a small company that does not process a lot of PII and you don't really develop your own large language model. If you
Right.
are just adding a layer, you don't really need to invest as much money into being compliant with a framework that's established for kind of different purpose. Let's be
Yeah, right.
honest. So I would say let's avoid adopting overly stringent frameworks designed for high risk AI system if they don't align with your actual risk profile. And then a second piece of that Tailor approach is for me personally very important piece, which is vendor evaluation. I talked about it a little bit previously. So for any organization that is utilizing third party AI solutions, and I think at this point it's 90% of companies, you should focus on thoroughly assessing vendors' compliance with relevant standards and regulations. So, this ensures that the external tools meet your internal risk and compliance criteria.
Man, that's cool. Yeah, so yeah, I totally understand that. So when you're tailoring that, when you're selecting the vendor, are you using a standard set or a custom set that's been tailored to the business unit or to the corporation? Like, where is that tailoring of the vendor selection coming in? Is there a set of standard things that you would expect that you need to get answered?
So, obviously, this going to be different by the size and risk profile. However, I will say a few things that we always look at is how long has the vendor been established? Are there any pending lawsuits, reputational risks, things like that? What are the information security standards that they follow? Do they have SOC 2? What are their privacy principles? Can we modify our contracts with said vendor to include provisions such as please do not train on our data, right?
Right.
So there is like a set of questions that we want run our vendors through. However, I know that there is a lot of third party vendor assessments providers. OneTrust
Right.
has one of the tools. There's a few others, and I know that they run every vendor through very similar set of questions.
Let's talk about unfortunate, like, truth about this. So some of those things that you were mentioning, especially around AI companies, even like the most senior ones, not that long in business, the commercial application of what they're doing is not completely clear, right? So there's a lot of unknown that so if you plotted that company out on a risk matrix, they would appear high and volatile every single time. How do you deal with that problem? And then my follow-up to that would be, let's say someone passes this, you decide to start working with them, but they decide to change their commercial model. How do you reevaluate to ensure that the model that you put them against is still accurate in the future?
Absolutely. So again, this goes back to the contractual provisions that you have in place. Most of the contracts that I was involved in negotiation of, we try to include provisions that ensure that the AI provider will not change the terms of our agreement. Like this is a standard for any other contract that we review. Like if you sign a contract and a provider says that they only process information and store information in the US, if they come back and say we're actually moving our data centers to China, that's going to be, breach of contract potentially. So I think having a very strong contractual provisions is something that can protect you. And then to answer to your first question, The way to mitigate the risk, because yes, I do agree that most of the AI vendors are high risk vendors, is to see whether you can just use high risk vendors on the information that's not high risk. So, for example, if you see a technology that can help you with certain areas of your business, try to use the high risk technology with low risk data.
Yeah, so if I wanted to use AI to help me write marketing messages from that creative or that risk is lower, the information is not really sensitive, versus if you're trying to figure out some kind of trend on all of your usage, as an example, if you're a software company or something.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Okay, so let's take on transform. So I got track, I got Tailor. I really like looking at these traditional sort of risk frameworks onto the world of AI. So that makes sense. So what are we looking at when we talk about transform?
So when we're talking about transforming, and this is not going to be anything groundbreaking because this is the basic of any sort of privacy and governance program. So AI governance is not a one-time setup, but rather an ongoing process that requires continuous attention and adaptation. So to maintain and evolve with your AI governance program, you should focus on the cultural integration. And what I mean when I say cultural integration is fostering a culture that would encourage meticulous documentation and also adherence to the risk management principles. So, this would involve training and empowering employees to recognize and report on the potential risk. Um, Obviously, this piece should also include training your employees on the innovation. If innovation is something that you want to be focused on, create that space by enabling your employees to create new things. And this where the enablement team comes. So if you have a dedicated team or just like a one team member that keeps current with all of the AI developments and can keep the whole workforce engaged and up to date, that adds immense value to this whole process. And then
Amazing.
you also have to do regular reviews. You should periodically assess all of your AI systems to ensure that they remain compliant. You have to check your regulations. Nowadays, I think right now in March of 2025, we've got more than 800 bills in various US states that talk about AI. So
Right.
that's a very fast changing environment. There's just one piece into that, which is the stakeholder engagement. So I would recommend engaging a diverse stakeholders team, which should include your developers, your legal, technical, operational teams, marketing, talent solutions in this governance process to ensure that you actually understand what people are doing across the firm.
Now, I want to be clear. Yeah, 90% of enterprise does have someone within the company trying or using I think I read something like only like 35% of companies have a AI governance and policy put in place, and it's in its infancy. So a lot of the things you're talking about, I don't really know if organizations have been able to make that transformation internally on their own, right? Yet. Now, I have no doubt that that will happen, but when you are talking about some of these champions and roles and executive buy-in and the stakeholders, I keep thinking about my friends in the insurance industry who work at a carrier who their leader has zero interest in using any of these technologies. Their experience with them is at the Today Show level, sort of what Chat GPT can do, right? What do you say to those kind of organizations led by those kind of people who are not really taking this seriously?
I mean, like with any sort of innovation, right? It's either you hop on a train or you get left behind. So every organization eventually has to adapt. Like right now is the age of AI, and we're only going to see more advanced technology. If you are not able to adapt on this very basic level, maybe you just need organizational changes. And I think, to be honest, not everyone is ready to hop in full on the AI train. And I think that's when this talk about enablement and showing how AI technologies are not this scary thing that's going to come and replace you is something that should be done more often.
Really think that the change management, and I work in tech and I'm a CRO in a tech company. So for me, maybe we have a higher tolerance for software changing, technology changing. I'm a technologist. But I have to think that at some point, if you're not making these plans, if you're not getting your organization ready, it's some sort of derelict of leadership duty. There needs to be looked at as a failure, not an option. It would be like if I didn't want to use cell phones to communicate to someone. It doesn't actually make sense. It's not up for debate.
Absolutely. And I agree with that. And again, the part about enabling your teams and trying to, sometimes even with risk management, it's very hard to come to people and say, okay, innovate, do fast things. We want to go forward. However, think about all of those other things. We have to show them a trade off. So, for example, if we create a spreadsheet that we would like to get from our developers that talks about ethical AI or ask questions about that, I always try to add like something it's in it for them. Meaning
Yes.
that if you complete the spreadsheet or whatever that I am asking you, I'm going to show it to other stakeholders that may be interested in this product. And I'm going to make sure to connect you with those people to have a broader audience for what you're creating. And I think by encouraging that kind of behavior, we are creating an environment where people are encouraged to develop in alliance with this risk management principles that were put in place.
I love what you're saying because I always tell people that risk management is about helping an organization define its appetite so that it can operate at the very edges and take full advantage of that whole spectrum, right? So that when I'm in the business, I don't have to be thinking about am I doing the right thing or whatnot, because as long as it's below that line, you have autonomy to make those decisions, right? And I think that's not really the opportunity that risk management creates for organizations is often not talked about enough, and that they're kind of creating a boundary for the organization to be innovative in, right? And I think that's a really important part of when I talk to young people about thinking about going into a career in risk management. I go, it's actually really cool because what you're doing is you're actually defining the organization's boundaries. And your job as a risk manager is to push those boundaries and make it a little bit wider. And that's that give and pull that you're talking about. That's actually making it in it for them, which is the business.
Yes, I love that part of risk management professionals actually being part of the team and understanding the team and not sitting somewhere, in the high tower and pushing down the rules down. So yes, I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Let's talk about a little bit about cyber threats and how, introducing things like AI driven cybersecurity that are coming into market now to look at cyber in ways that maybe humans couldn't see those patterns before, or the old software. Let's just talk about that for a little bit and catch the audience up on sort of that landscape and where your head is on that topic.
Yes, so I think the first thing that everyone should start doing is updating their information security training to include examples of AI phishing attacks, because those are becoming much more sophisticated. It's much easier to gather large amounts of information about an individual to create a profile. So just making sure that your workforce is aware that this space is changing. The second tier to that is what I'm going to sound like a broken record, but again, your vendor management, like you have to understand how vendors are connecting to your systems. You have to evaluate those vendors and their security posture. You have to be up to date on all of those things. And I just want to highlight one thing, that because we have AI now, we're also uniquely qualified to stay more up to date on those cybersecurity threats. So,
Right.
you can nowadays like use perplexity space and create ongoing self-updating chart essentially that shows you most recent public cybersecurity attacks. You can have resources that shows you, for example, every Monday push 5 news articles that are talking about most recent cybersecurity incidents that involve AI. Like just give people awareness so they know what they're looking out for.
Man, it's been really great talking to you. I do want to play a game. Are you up for a game, Paulina?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This is a game we play on the show called Risky or Too Risky. And I'm going to throw out a couple quick fire questions for you. And you're going to tell me if it's risky or too risky. And then if it's interesting in some way, I will dive into it. If not, we'll move forward. Okay.
Perfect. Already
Okay.
scared.
Sharing administrative passwords among team members to facilitate operations, risky or too risky?
Risky.
Oh, all right. Well, how do you manage a bunch of passwords? Like what I mean, does everyone have password managers? How do you actually solve that problem? And also what happens when the financial team wants to come against it and say, "Oh, it's better from a cost perspective."
Well, whenever someone comes and says that it's better from the cost perspective, I really like to pull up the amount of money that companies have to pay because of the security breaches. And we
Oh,
got a
damn, that's
very,
good.
very large file on that. Uh,
It's like every
we're
time
not,
you see one, you're like putting that in the file, putting that in
yeah,
the
goes in
file.
the file for the later reference.
Yeah.
I honestly cannot really give you a specific recommendation for the passwords because I work mostly in the privacy. I know that everyone from my information security team is going to be like, okay, we're doing that. But I cannot give you specific recommendation on that. I just will say that I know that Microsoft has specific tools to use specifically for that.
Absolutely. Okay, let's do an operations one. Relying on a single employee for multiple critical skills, risky or too risky?
Risky, depending on the
Risky.
size, I guess. Like it's such a hard question.
Yeah, because if you're like a startup, you're definitely gonna be relying on a single employee for multiple critical skills. I guess the question here with leaning on AI would be, what can you do from the very beginning, from the very earliest stage of an organization to ensure that information is getting someplace that can be accessed by multiple people, right? I think it's the first time in history that and I was telling someone this, we were talking about our kids, but the idea was this is the first generation that probably won't have the writer's block or the blank page syndrome, right? It will be an
Yes.
editing crisis. I can't think of how to edit this or make it better. It's probably going to be the crisis that we're in the future.
Yes, I agree, and I think usually a really good practice if you rely solely on one employee to have some central knowledge base, or maybe ask them, what do you rely on? Do a check-ins, do a like 3 months check-in, and see what do you mostly rely on, and can you back this up somewhere? So if something happens to you, or I don't know, you have to go on the PDO, someone other can access this information.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm finding that, like AI note takers now. I joined a meeting the other day and there was like 100 AI note takers in the webinar. Like, and I'm also seeing sometimes I get on a call and if the AI note taker comes on, the person that I'm on the call with has a negative reaction to it. But I'm like, isn't this the promise of the future of being able to capture this information, actually be accurate in the future? And I think that comes a lot down to people's concerns about privacy, right? And being able to speak off the record, so to speak. Although all the tools that people are doing this on have been recording calls for the last 5 to 10 years. So there's really no such thing as off the record, right? So we're kind of in a weird paradigm where we're straddling the line on some of this stuff. But creating that knowledge base from a very early on, I think should be a corporate initiative for everyone. How do we get everybody's knowledge into the company? I think that's what we lose, right? It kind of takes away some power from tenure, which is interesting to talk about, but it also enables other people to get up to speed faster and understand the nuances of an organization in a way I can't imagine what it's going to be like 5 years from now.
Absolutely, I agree with
Uh,
that.
Personal one. Let's see. Let's good one for you. Ooh, engaging in an extreme sport like bungee jumping or skydiving, risky or too risky for you
For me
personally?
personally, too risky. Cannot do
Too.
skydiving.
Okay, so what's the most extreme sport thing you've done?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna sound so bizarre. Pilates?
Oh, no, I hope you didn't pull anything. All right, we'll put that
Hiking,
Pilates risky.
hiking.
Good job. It's more than I'm doing, so I appreciate that. Hey, Paulina, it was really great on having you on Brick by Brick. I really appreciate it. One last question. What's a piece of advice you would give to someone thinking about coming into risk management or into your world, that you wish that you would have had when you started your career?
Only enter this field if you can stay curious and if you like learning new things. and learning essentially new languages, because when you speak with legal, you speak different language, and then you go and speak with developers and you speak a different language, and then you go report to stakeholders and you have to take all of those languages and translate that into something that's comprehensible. So stay
I
curious.
love that. I love curiosity is definitely key. And also if they then say, well, then I'm not interested in those things, maybe you don't want to be friends with them anyway. Um,
That's
so thank you for joining me. I hope to see you at a conference and catch you next time. Bye.
perfect. Thank you so much. Bye.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to trustlayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.